So first I'll briefly talk to you about the Clerk and Comptroller's office. Then we'll talk about how and where you can apply for a passport in Palm Beach County. We'll talk about proving identity and citizenship, the forms involved with passport applications and the fees, and then some special issues regarding passports for minors. And then, as I mentioned, we'll open it up for questions. So the Clerk and Comptroller is the trustee of the county's public records and public funds. And we offer various different services to the county, and one of them is our self-service center. At that center, we offer the public user-friendly packets that have all the forms they need to initiate certain cases, civil cases, county civil cases, small claims, landlord, tenant, and family law cases. And in the forms that you have today, there's a list of all the different form packets that we sell and how much they cost. We also have public access computers where people can look up their case. We have an e-filing station where people can scan documents and e-file. We have self-service attorneys that can give people procedural information and help them fill out the forms. They cannot give advice or represent anybody in court, and that is a low-cost service that we offer. It's $1 a minute in increments of 15 minutes, and they can help with any of those packets that we have at the self-service center. And we make copies, notary services, and a few other clerical services that we provide. The Clerk and Comptroller is not allowed to give any legal advice. We can only give procedural information. So before we start talking about the passport application process, I'd just like to quickly note the difference between a passport card and a passport book. There are passport cards that you can apply for. The main advantage is that they are cheaper, but they do have restrictions in that they're only valid for land or sea travel to Mexico, Canada, or the Caribbean. And a great example that one of my coworker gives in deciding whether or not you want a passport card or a passport book is, if you went on a cruise to the Caribbean, you could use the passport card to go on that cruise. But if there was an emergency and you had to fly back before the cruise was over, you wouldn't be able to get on the plane if all you brought with you was a passport card. So depending on what kind of travel you're doing, if you don't have your own car, you may want to consider the passport book. Because the passport book is valid for all international travel. It's the traditional passport that you're used to seeing. If you'd like both, just for the convenience, the passport card is like the size of a credit card. In the application, you have the option of applying for both at the same time. Okay. When we get to the fees, you'll see the price difference between the two. So, how and where to apply for a passport? If you've never had a passport before, you're going to have to apply for a passport in person. And you would use the form DS-11. And I would also like to mention briefly that we have all the forms available here. They're in the back room. If you'd like to take one of each and take a look at it, you can do that. The form DS-11 has to be used if it's the first time you're applying for a passport, if you are a minor under the age of 16, if you've had a passport before but it was either lost, stolen, destroyed, damaged, or it's more than 15 years old, or if the previous passport that you had was issued when you were a minor and now you're an adult. Okay. Finally, the only other time that you would have to apply in person would be if your passport was in a different name and you don't have any legal documentation as to a name change, like a marriage license or a court-ordered name change. Where can you apply for a passport? Well, that depends on how soon you need to travel. Most of the time, you can apply for, you would apply for a passport at a passport acceptance facility, as long as your travel is more than 2 to 3 weeks away. Okay, and the clerk has 3 passport acceptance facilities. We have one at our South County Courthouse in Del Rey, one at our North County Courthouse in Palm Beach Gardens, and one at our West County Courthouse in Belglade. If your planned travel is very soon, less than 2 to 3 weeks away, then you would have to go to the regional passport agency, which for us is Miami. They only work by appointment, so you would have to call them and explain their situation. The number is there, and this presentation will also be on our My Palm Beach Clerk website if you need to access it in the future. There are some circumstances where you can apply by mail, and then you would use the form DS-82. And basically, that is summed up as you've had a passport before. If you've had a passport before, you can produce it. It's not destroyed. It's not damaged. You were an adult when it was issued, and it was issued less than 15 years ago, then you can apply for a passport by mail, and you don't have to go into a facility. You can do that even if you have a different name than is on the passport, as long as you can provide legal documentation of that name change, as I mentioned before, like a marriage license, or if you change your name through a name change action, the court order. Whether you apply by mail or in person, you need to prove two things to get a passport. You need to prove your identity, and you need to prove that you are a U.S. citizen. So we're just going to go over some of the documentation you can use to prove those things. We'll start with the documentation required for adults, and then we'll talk about minors because it's slightly different. And we'll talk about some of the situations where you may not have some of these documents easily available to you. So, proof of identity. Easiest is if you're applying by mail and you have your previous U.S. passport, your U.S. passport can prove your identity even if it's expired. Okay? And you would have to actually send the physical passport in with your mail application. They will give it back to you when they send you the new passport, but you actually have to submit turn in your old passport when you apply by mail. If you're going in person, because it's more than 15 years old, you can still use your passport as proof of identity. A valid driver's license, that does have to be not expired, or a certificate of naturalization or citizenship with a photo. Some copies of the certificate don't have a photo affixed to it. It has to have a photo to serve as proof of your identity. U.S. military card, a government employee ID card, or a valid foreign passport. That cannot be expired. If you're relying on a passport from another country to prove your identity, it has to be still valid. When you go, you're going to present the original and a photocopy of the front and back of your ID. If you don't have any of those documents, they may allow you to use secondary identity documents, but you'll have to provide at least two. The other documents that we discussed, you just need one of them and you're good to go. These you would need to present at least two, and they include a state issue ID card, an expired driver's license, a school ID card, or a work ID. And finally, these are some supplemental documents. They will never work on their own to prove your identity, but if you don't have any of the other documents, we're going to discuss in a minute that you have to complete an affidavit with a witness, and then you would need to provide any supporting documentation that you have of your identity, which would include some of these documents, such as a voter's registration card, social security card, a learner's permit, or club membership card, anything that has your name and your photo on it that could serve to support it even though it doesn't prove your identity. So if you cannot provide any of the primary or secondary documents, you will have to apply in person, and you will need to bring an identifying witness with you. That witness will have to be a U.S. citizen, national, or permanent resident. They need to have known you for at least 2 years. They need to have documentation of their identity. And they will have to sign an affidavit in front of the acceptance agents, swearing under penalty of perjury that they know you and how they know you. And you're going to need to bring any kind of supporting evidence that you have, documentation regarding your identity. Now, the passport acceptance agent at the facility does not make the decision whether you've sufficiently proven your identity. They're going to take the affidavit, they're going to take the supporting documents, they're going to submit it to the Department of State for processing, and they'll ultimately be the ones that inform you, if you didn't have one of those for sure, identification documents, of whether what you provided was sufficient. We also have the identifying witness form in the back if you'd like to take one at the end of the workshop. The next thing you have to prove is proof of your citizenship. Once again, the easiest way to prove that is if you have a previous passport, but if not, a certified copy of your birth certificate would work. It has to be the full birth certificate that has that raised seal and the section on the parent's information. Because here in Florida, we have like the summary copy of the birth certificate, if you've ever seen it. It's just like one column and it has the name of the child, where they were born, the date of birth. That one would not work. It has to be the official certified complete certificate of live birth. A certificate of naturalization would work to prove citizenship. And if you were born in another country, and in addition to the foreign birth certificate, they prepared a report of birth abroad, you could use that form as well. You have to submit, once again, the original and one photocopy, front and back. Some of the trickier situations usually come up when a U.S. citizen was born abroad, because sometimes, depending on what's going on in the other country, it may be, if they lost the document, it may be hard for them to get another copy. So if you were born abroad, but your parents are U.S. citizens, or at least one of your parents is a U.S. citizenship, and you don't have primary evidence of your citizenship, you would have to provide all of these, not just one of these, to prove your citizenship. So you need to provide evidence of your parents' citizenship, your foreign birth certificate, and if your foreign birth certificate is in another language, it would have to be translated. You would have to provide your parents' marriage license if they are married to each other, and the citizen parent or parents would have to sign a notarized affidavit saying any period of time that they've lived in the United States from when they were born until when you were born. Okay, so it's much easier if you have proof of primary citizenship, because otherwise you're going to have to provide all these things, but there are some circumstances where people are unable to get that. If you were born abroad and your parents are naturalized U.S. citizens, then in addition to your foreign birth certificate with the translation, you would need to provide your parent or parent certificate of naturalization, once again their marriage certificate if applicable, and you'd have to provide proof of your legal entry into the United States, either a green card or a foreign passport with the I-551 stamp. Okay. So, additional things most people know: if you need a passport, you need a passport photo. The photo must be in color with a white background. It has to be 2 inches by 2 inches. You can be the only person in the picture. It has to be a current photo of you, a recent photo of you within the last 6 months. It can't be 15 years ago. It has to have a full front view of your face, and you're supposed to have a neutral facial expression. They usually tell you that when you take the picture. You can't have crazy face or a huge smile. You can't have any glasses. That's pretty recent, as of 2015. Even if you normally wear your glasses on a daily basis and would be wearing it when you travel, you have to take them off for the picture. That's a relatively new law. And you can't have a hat or a head covering unless you sign a sworn statement saying that it's for religious purposes. If you'd like to do it all in one location, at all of our Clerk's acceptance facilities, we also can take the photos for an additional fee, so you wouldn't have to bring it with you. And we'll talk about the fees in just a second. Okay, so fee requirements. There are a lot of different fees depending on whether you want a passport book or a passport card, whether you're applying in person or by mail, whether you need it in a rush. So I did actually give you a handout that has all of the different fees for passport books or cards. It says United States passport fees on top, so that if you don't remember all this at the end of the workshop, you can reference your handout. So if you need to apply in person, there are 2 fees. There is the application fee that is going to be paid to the Department of State, and there is the execution fee that is going to be paid to the acceptance facility where you go in to get your passport. The application fee varies depending on whether you're an adult or a minor and you're getting a card or a book, which is why I was saying really the only advantage of the passport card is its size and that it's significantly cheaper. If you were going to apply for both, then you would add the cost. For example, if you were an adult and you wanted a passport book and a card, it would be 110 plus 30, so 140. Okay. The Department of State only accepts check or money order payable to them. The execution fee is $25 for everyone. And if you're applying at the clerk's office acceptance facilities, we accept check, money order, cash, or credit card. If you're one of those people that applies to renew by mail, then you only have to worry about the application fees, and you don't have to pay that $25 execution fee. There may be some additional fees. These don't apply to everyone. The first slide that we just discussed are the basic fees that everyone has to pay. These are additional fees depending on if you need any of the services rushed. Okay? So if you are traveling in less than 4 weeks, the Department of State is going to make you pay an expedited service fee of $60 to ensure that you will get it within the 4 weeks. Because their routine time is 4 to 6 weeks, so they can't guarantee that you would get it any sooner than that. They're also going to charge you $15.45 to overnight the passport to you if you're traveling within 2 to 3 weeks. And that is in addition to the expedited service fee. You can only overnight a request for a passport book. They do not overnight the passport card, so if you were applying for both, those will come separately. And the last additional fee that the Department of State might have is the file search fee. That is rare. It's also $150. If you've had a passport before and you cannot locate it, or it's destroyed or damaged, but you can't find it, and you cannot provide any other proof of citizenship, you can pay $150. The Department of State will search the files for you and get the documentation from your previous passport application. But because it's $150, it's usually a last resort. Yes. These are some additional fees you might have to pay at the facility where you go apply for the passport. If you are traveling less than 4 weeks away, then you're going to have to pay an additional fee so that we can mail the entire application packet to the processing center overnight, and that's $23.75. That is required if your travel is less than 4 weeks away. And if you choose to have your photos taken at the Clerk passport acceptance facilities, it's $11.77 for the photo service. Okay, we talked about the two main forms, the DS-11 for in-person applications and the DS-82 for mail applications. There are some additional forms that may come up if you have any of these special circumstances. The DS-64 form is a form that you're required to fill out if you've had a passport in the past, but the reason you cannot produce it is that it was lost or stolen. DS-5504 is a very limited circumstance. If the last passport you had was issued within the last year, but you need another one for one of these reasons listed here that we'll discuss, you can actually apply by mail using that form, and then you do not have to pay a fee like the $110 or the $80 for a new passport. But it's very limited circumstances. If you change your name less than a year within the last year, and you can provide legal documentation of that. If it was an error on the side of the Department of State, so something was printed incorrectly on your passport, then they'll let you use this form and get one for free, another one for free. Or if your most recent U.S. passport was limited for some reason other than multiple losses or seriously damaged passport. I'm not 100% sure what that circumstance would be, and maybe one of my colleagues may be able to touch on that situation.
Typically, if it's if the traveler has an urgent need to leave the country and that's documented, they will normally issue a limited validity passport due to the urgent nature of urgent travel. And limit it to 2 years or less. And then it gives you time to submit the proper documentation.
Perfect. And then you could use that form and not have to pay additional fees. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to discuss passports for minors. If a minor is between 16 and 17 years old, the rules really aren't that different. They are treated, for the most part, like an adult if they have their own proof of identity, identifying document. The fees are the same as for an adult, and what can prove identity and citizenship are the same as for an adult. They don't require consent from both parents if they're 16 or older, but they do require something called parental awareness from at least one parent. Okay, and we'll talk about what constitutes parental awareness. So what that means is if you're 16 or 17, you could technically apply for the passport by yourself if you have all the documentation that's required. So how can you prove parental awareness? Well, you could bring a parent with you. If at least one parent accompanies you, that's sufficient. You can have a signed statement of consent from one parent attached to a copy of their photo ID. It has to be a copy of the front and back of their photo ID. If the method of payment is from the parent, that could be considered parental awareness. So you have a check with your parent's, name and address on top. That could be considered parental awareness. However, this is all for a minor who can produce their own driver's license or previous passport, something that proves their ID. If a minor does not have their own ID, then they are required to bring at least one parent. That parent has to have their own ID and also proof of parental relationship, so something that proves that they're actually the parents of this child, like a birth certificate or a divorce decree or something to that effect. However, if a minor is under 16, then the rules and the fees are different. You still have to prove the citizenship of the minor, but they're not required to have their own identifying document. What you have to prove is the identity of their parents and proof of the parental relationship, that these people standing before you are actually their parents. And in most cases, you're going to need the consent of both parents for a minor under 16 to get a passport. And we'll discuss the exceptions to that in a second. So what can prove parental relationship? A birth certificate, that proves both citizenship of the child and the parental relationship if it has the parents' names on the bottom of it. That doesn't always prove the parental relationship of both parents, because some birth certificates, sometimes they don't have the father's name, and then you would need some other proof. A consular report of birth abroad, a foreign birth certificate, a divorce, paternity, custody decree that discusses the parents and the child. As far as parental consent, in most cases, both parents must actually physically appear in person with the minor to get a passport for them. Unless, if one parent appears but both parents agree, the other parent who cannot be present can sign a form called the DS 3053, which is a statement of consent, saying that although they cannot be there, they do consent. That form has to have been signed by the other parent within the last 90 days. It must be notarized, and you are required to have a copy of that parent's ID, the front and the back. Okay. You also don't need parental consent from both parents if you have sole legal authority over the child, which means either you have a court order that says that, despite the other parent being identified, or there's only one parent on the birth certificate. If you cannot locate the other parent and you cannot submit any other kind of consent, there is a form that we'll discuss more detail in just a second, the DS 5525, Statement of Exigent Special Family Circumstances, where you can explain to the Department of State what's going on, but we're going to discuss why sometimes that's not effective. Okay, so we discussed the statement of consent, less than 90 days old, signed in the presence of a notary, submitted with that photo ID. The exigent circumstances, you would need to complete it with as much detail as possible. You would need to say the efforts that you made to try to locate the parent or try to get the parent's consent. And once again, the acceptance facility, we can't guarantee you that it's going to be enough for the Department of State. You're going to write it with as much detail as possible. We're going to submit it. They're the ones that are going to let you know if it's acceptable or not. They may still require you to go to court and get a court order giving you sole custody of the child, even after you fill out the statement of exigent circumstances. They're going to determine whether it's exigent or not. So we have some helpful links here. The Department of State's website has all of this information. It also has links to the forms if you need to print them online, as does our Clerk's and Comptroller's passport page. We have links to all the forms. We have all the rules. We're going to have this presentation on there. We also have the hours of all our passport acceptance facilities and the address. The Department of Homeland Security and the US Gov passport pages are helpful if you have questions about travel to a specific country, if there's any restrictions at the moment. If you're in another country, you need to find the consulate, you have an issue with your passport. Or if you have a hold on getting a passport for some other reasons. There are other reasons that sometimes people have a hold on their passport, like if they owe a certain amount of child support arrears, or there may be other violations that put a hold on your passport. That can only be removed by the Department of Homeland Security and not by the local courts. Anybody have any questions?
Well, I'm thinking of getting my passport reissued.
Yes.
It's only 1 year expired.
Okay.
So I would have to send in my passport and do.
Correct. It would be easier. You could use the DS-82 form, and your old passport serves as proof of your identity and your citizenship. So you just have to put that one document in there with the application and the fee.
So you still have to pay another application fee and all that?
You have to pay the 110 fee. Yes, they don't make it cheaper to renew it than they did to apply the first time. But you don't have to pay the $25 execution fee.
Okay.
And as long as you do it well in advance, you don't have to pay any of those expedited fees either.
Okay.
And you still have to provide a new photo. Yes.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, even though it's only been...
changed in 16 years.
Yes,
so.
exactly. Yes. Anybody else?
Do the minors under 16 have to take photos, like 2-year-olds?
They do, even infants. And the Department of State website has advice on how to take a forward-facing, centered photo of an infant, because it is difficult. I know. So it actually has pointers for, what you can prop the infant against that's still white in the background, and how to get them centered and not to put their face too close or too far away. It is tricky. But yeah, even if it's a 3-month-old baby, you need a photo. Yeah. Which is why minors' passports are issued for shorter periods of time. They're only good for 5 years before you'd have to renew them, as opposed to 10, like adults. Yes.
I do have another question. So what if you have a child that's a minor, but you don't know who the father is or whatever? Right. You have no clue, and you don't even know how to go about locating the possible father to be. How would somebody go around?
Well, the only good thing about that situation is that usually if you don't have a clue who they aren't on the birth certificate.
Right.
So you would be considered having sole parental authority, so they would only need your consent.
Okay, because that's two,
right. So as long as you're the only one on the birth certificate, it's okay. The problem is not the cases where people don't know who the father is. It's they know who the father is, they're on the birth certificate, and then they disappeared.
Okay.
And then it's usually when you would have to apply for some sort of paternity action or a divorce if you're married, apply for publication because you can't locate the person, explain all the efforts you made, and so it's a lengthier process that you would want to start way in advance of any travel, because the court process is going to take several months. If they're not on the birth certificate, the child only needs your consent. Okay. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Is that correct? Okay. Anybody else? Great.
It's expensive.
It is very expensive.
I was surprised at the $150
Yeah.
to just pull up my, nowadays it should be in the computer. You pull up your
Right.
name. And
If you were born in the U.S., there really isn't much reason why you should ever have to pay that $150, because you can go to Vital Statistics in the county where you were born and get a copy of your birth certificate, which will prove your citizenship. That fee exists mostly for people who were born abroad and then have had their documents destroyed or something. Yeah. Usually if you were born here, you can find a way to get it yourself. Cheaper.
Slightly cheaper.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming. If you didn't sign in, please do so. And then I gave you a little survey just to evaluate the workshop. You can put your name, or it can be anonymous, and if you can just turn them in to us on the way out, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.